Why are we allowed to eat meat? And why is the diet of human beings such an integral part of the story of creation? Nachdem wird der Torah erzählt wegen der Bria von Chayes Haaretz und Brias Adam v'Yishtabeh Shishler Ma'aseh Bereishis. After the Torah tells us about the creation of animals and of humans on the sixth day of creation, Kelel den Dibur von Eibishter zum Adam v'Chava, which includes the instruction from the Eibishter to Adam and Chava, Vayvorach Gomer, that he blessed them, and then instructed them, Puru Gomer, that you should multiply, Urudu Bidgas Hayom Gomer, and that they would have the power to control or to be, so to speak, in charge of the creatures of the world. Then there are two psukim where the Torah describes the diet of humans and of animals. The two psukim are, the Eibishter says, I'm giving you all manner of growing things. That's what you should eat. Next pasuk, and all the animals and birds, they also get to eat vegetation. So Rashi picks up on this. So Rashi uses as a headline the end of the first pasuk together with the beginning of the second pasuk, which is quite unusual. And he says, that vegetation will be for you, the humans, to eat, as well as to the animals. And as before, she explains as follows. That the Eibishter made animals similar or equal to humans as regards eating. The Eibishter did not permit humans to kill animals in order to eat their meat. Rather, all creatures should eat vegetation together. What's Rashi telling us? But Pashas Landman would seem at first glance as the fact that he makes animals equal to humans with regards to food is would seem very simply that the pasuk is telling us that humans, like animals, are not permitted to eat meat. Like the Goraria says, just like animals only eat vegetation. Humans also may only eat grasses and vegetables and nothing else. That's what it would seem to be. But and it's quite a difficult way to explain things because we know that that's not the case. Aleph. From the fact that Rashi tells us that the Eibishter equated humans and animals with regards to their diets, how from that, how do we learn from that the humans can't eat meat? We see that there are many animals that are predators. So how can you tell me that we're eating like animals, but therefore we don't eat meat? Animals eat meat. And it would be really far-fetched to suggest that the Rashi holds like the Ramban that before the Chet Eitzadas there were no predators on earth, no carnivores. And the nature of animals changed after the Chet Eitzadas. It's possible that that's true, but if that was Rashi's Shita, Rashi would have mentioned it somewhere in his commentary on the Torah. It's such a radical statement. Or at the very least, he would have alluded to it. So the Re'im learned the pshat von Hishvach von Adam Sechais v'chol. So therefore, the Re'im understands what Rashi is telling us, that the Eibishter equates the diets of humans and animals. That it means as kashem Adam. It means in the same way that the Eibishter did not permit animals to eat humans. Likewise, we are not allowed to kill an animal in order to eat its meat. But even that is difficult to fit into what Rashi is telling us. Because if that is the message, it's completely missing from Rashi's Pirush. Rashi should have said it, that animals may not eat human beings, which by the way is a surprise to us. Rashi should have told us. That's the first question. How can you say that we are supposed to be vegetarian like animals when animals are also carnivorous? The other question is, there's a question in the other direction. Why do we need this hekesh? That humans are like animals with regards to eating vegetation. From that we're going to learn that humans can't eat meat. You see that clearly in the words of the pasuk. The pasuk sagt, the Torah says, I'm giving you the produce of the field to eat. What the Torah is telling us is that the Eibishter permitted us to eat vegetation. Like Rashi says, in his commentary, they are like the grasses that are permitted Adam to eat. That means the pasuk says we were permitted to eat vegetation and not meat. Why do you need to have a hekesh that we're like animals? Just like animals don't eat meat, so do we also not eat meat. And lastly, Gimel b'chalofen ve'ikra. There's another key aspect that we have to ask over here. In Yonish, as we well know, Rashi's intention is to explain the simplest understanding of the psukim. What did we not understand when the pasuk told us that you're supposed to eat vegetation? What did we not understand about that Rashi has to come and explain? What it means is that we are equated to animals with regards to our diet. Now, besides that, there are three nuances in the language of Rashi that we have to analyze. Rashi, there are a few details of Rashi's language which we're going to assess. Number one, Aleph. Why does Rashi use such an unusual expression? The Eibusha did not permit us to eat meat. A signal shall sipra, as if he's telling us, illustrating, telling us about it rather than giving us halacha. Should have been a language which is more definitive, more halachic, that meat is forbidden, or something like that. Question one. Question two, Beis. Rashi is Moshe as the Isa is laham. Why does Rashi not say just simply that you can't eat meat? No, he says you may not kill an animal to eat its meat. Why doesn't he keep it more generic and simpler that we're not allowed to eat meat? The way Rashi says it implies that to eat the meat of an animal that died of natural causes would have been permitted to Adam and his wife. Where do you see that in the Pshat? And lastly, Gimel Tzidivos, Daf Rashi, Iber Chazan Barichos. Why does Rashi repeat information and with a fair amount of detail as Kol Yerek Esav Yoichlu Yachad Kulam, that you can eat vegetation, all of you, meaning the animals and the humans, together? Why do I need that information? Rashi already told us that humans are not permitted to eat meat. And the pasuk already told us clearly that vegetation is for eating. That's both for humans and for animals. Why does Rashi have to then tell us we eat all the vegetation together? Before we can answer that, we're going to see another thing that Rashi says a little later, which seems to be misplaced, doesn't seem to belong over here. And based on that, we'll be able to ask the key question Rashi is bothered by, which will help us to understand what Rashi is trying to tell us. Rashi continues. When the children of Noach came along, the Eibishter now permitted them to eat meat. How do we know that? Because the pasuk says, anything that walks on the land or creeps on the land, becomes now like vegetation, which originally I permitted to Adam Arishan. Now, I allow you now as humans also to eat meat as well. Now, we understand why Rashi felt the need to address the fact that Bnei Noach, or by extension humanity, are allowed to eat meat. That we can understand is move on. Why is that understood? Because we get kama pi'amim, as we've mentioned multiple times, as Hagam Rashi vereinfacht nicht befirush Ashverkeit, was wird nicht serven beim Lernen Ashpete dicke Posuk in Tersha B'chsav. We know that Rashi doesn't usually address questions which will only emerge later, as you learn something later in the Torah. He's not going to address them now, typically, and certainly Valachas Kama V'chamin Itanina in Tersha B'al Peh, and Rashi is certainly not going to address an issue which will only emerge once you learn in Tersha B'al Peh. Unochmer, ve'baldas Pirshashi alater is the pshuto shel mikra. Is nicht token hechech as das muss sein matim behessen mit askonos in la halacha. And the truth is, because Rashi is focused on the pshat does not always have to fit perfectly with the halachic outcome later on. So we know that Rashi normally does not raise issues that we don't yet know about, but this is an issue we do know about. Because B'shasabet, Rashi is the first and pasuk for ben chomish lemikra. When Rashi explains over here to the 5-year-old who's learning chomish for the first time that the Eibusha did not allow Adam and Chava and their family to eat meat, but Rashi has to address the fact that a child's going to say, but we eat meat. That's why Rashi has to immediately address at the time of Adam, meat was off limits, but then the Eibusha permitted it. Warum der Pirchasler hier schon ist bestimmt zu dem Zies, was der Menschlim sagt, as Meshachta bei him of Cholim Esther Basar. Because the statement that the Eibusha only permitted original humans to only eat vegetation contradicts the reality that the child sees we eat meat. That we get, we understand why Rashi has to address it. How he addresses it, that's the question. Someone eat more, and that doesn't make sense. Aleph, oif zu pavonen dem Prat is genug zu sagen bloß dem Din. All Rashi really needed to do was to tell us the halacha, which is that when the Bnei Noach arrived on earth, they allowed them to eat meat, and we'll learn about that later. Or some other allusion to the fact that it's coming later. Why is it relevant over here to know which pasuk coming up in Parshas Noach is going to be the one that tells us you're allowed to eat meat? Base second question. If for whatever reason Rashi feels it's absolutely necessary, to quote the pasuk, then he should have chosen to quote the beginning of the pasuk, which says that any creeping or crawling creature is permissible for you to eat. Which gives the point clearly that we're now allowed to eat meat, which is the question the child's going to have. Why does Rashi completely leave out the quotation of the fact that you may now eat meat? Doesn't say that. It just alludes to it with an etc. And yet he does include information which doesn't seem to be critical to understanding that we're allowed to eat meat, which is that meat is permitted to you now like vegetation was permitted to Adam Orishan. Why does Rashi go down that route? So in order to get to all of that, we have to ask ourselves, what is bothering Rashi? The Bir B'chol Zed explanation is, Mitzam Pirish, it's Rashaisen's friend from Kama Shailis and Deep Psukim. Rashi brings us all of this information because he wants to address two key issues that appear in the Psukim we're reading now, these two Psukim that go side by side. Aleph, first of all, was für ein Ort mit dir sein, in dem Sipur von Meise Bereishis. Think about this big question. Here the Eibishter is telling us about creation. Why is it relevant in creation? Was Menschen is Megan and Kenenessen, what the diet is of humans and animals. Why is that relevant to the story of creation? The theme of these psukim is about the story of how the world and its creatures were created, not the details of what those creatures need in order to survive. Now, the bracha is for Meise Bereishis. The blessing that they should be able to perpetuate the species, that's obviously part of the story of creation. Because it explains that the creation is sustainable and continues till today. That the different humans and the creatures were created in such a way that they should be able to propagate, and that's why we're still existing today. That's relevant to the story of creation. As well as the instruction that humans should have control over the animals. That's also relevant to the story of creation. Why? Is eingeschlossen in die Nyolim von Meise Bereishis, weil das gitatir von Neufen Brias Adam, because that helps us to understand the nature of how humans were created and the hierarchy of creation. Sein Eisgetelkeit von allen Nivroim, the fact that humans are unique and different to all the other creatures that live on this earth. As the pasuk says, humans are created in the Eibishter's image, and therefore they have dominion over the creatures. Because that's the flow. So that makes sense. That fits in. We're telling us about the uniqueness of human beings. Part of the uniqueness is we have dominion over the creatures. But when you get to the psukim that describe what humans and animals are going to eat, that doesn't seem to make sense. Doesn't belong over here. Why is that relevant to the story of creation? That's the first thing that's bothering Rashi. Number 2 base. Let's even argue that it is relevant to know the human diet at this particular point in Chumash. Let's assume that's a fact. And there's still a question. If it's critical for us to know what humans eat, why do you have to tell us what animals eat? And what about the birds that were created already the day before? Were they not yet permitted to eat because the instruction hadn't yet been given about diet? And you can't say, well, it's because humans are responsible to have dominion over the creatures, therefore they have to know what they eat. But seeing as humans were appointed as custodians over the animals, therefore they have to know what animals eat. That's not what it means to have dominion over the animals. We're not the zookeepers of the world. These are the two things that are bothering Rashi, and therefore, if to answer these two questions is Hashematik from Pasuk Diverta. Rashi quotes, as we've mentioned, the end of the first Pasuk, the beginning of the second Pasuk, Lochem Yelochla U Lechol Chayas Haaretz. He's emphasizing the fact that there's a conjunction, that there's a vav, that there's an and in between those two sentences. That and links these two psukim, one about the animals, one about the humans. That's relevant to our conversation. Rashi says, why is there an and between the pasuk describing what humans eat and what animals eat? To tell you that the Torah wants to equate humans and animals in regards to the eating. The kavone von dem Sim von ersten pasuk bechibut und zweiten pasuk is nicht zu sagen Isurim. The reason the first pasuk is linked to the second pasuk is not to tell us what we are forbidden from having. In other words, we can't eat meat. Nicht zu lassen wissen, was ein Mensch mag essen und was Chayes darf essen. It's not just to simply tell us what humans can eat, what animals must eat. Der Pasuk ist bloß ein Einsachmatik sein, die Gleichheit im Zadashove von Menschen und Chayes von Gese Essen und Meichel. Rather, these psukim are specifically showing us an equation, a similarity between humans and animals when it comes to eating. The mocker from the Misab Basar Allah the Mishal Hish v'chulei is taka from Mashmos from National Pasuk. Yes, the first pasuk is the one that alludes to the fact that humans are not meant to be eating meat. That's true. How do we know that? Because the full was the pasuk is matter blois yerek esef is muchal b'derech memela as pasuk is nit mutter. The fact that the first pasuk says I'm giving you vegetation to eat implies that I'm not giving you meat to eat. That is taka in the first pasuk. The Torah is gleich Mosif, but the Torah doesn't stop there. It immediately continues with a vav, with an and. As that and, that food that I'm allowing you to eat, is also the primary diet of all living creatures. Because the Torah wants to emphasize an equation, a similarity between humans and animals. Now, the fact is, some animals are carnivorous. They actually eat meat. That's not relevant to this conversation. The Vergleich ist mit Zadecha ben Egel Michael Adam, as sein Michael Esav is das selbe was Chayes behemoths essen. All the Torah wants us to know at this point in time is the fact that humans eat vegetation is equal to animals eating vegetation. That's the part that's relevant to our conversation over here. Und der Fall is and to be sure that we know this, Rashi adds words and repeats the message. When it comes to vegetation, that is where humans and animals will be the same in their diet. Animals may also have carnivorous animals, but with regards to human diet, we are the same as animals in eating only vegetables. Now the question we asked was, why is this relevant in the story of creation? To know that human diet is the same as animal diet. He's moving. Now we understand why. Because the Torah first told us the greatness of humans over animals. As we're created in the Eibishter's image. Therefore we have dominion over all the other creatures. Humans are great. Humans are great. Be careful with that. It's the pasuk immediately the Torah warns us. As when it comes to eating, humans and animals are the same. We have to remind the human being, yes, you are superior to all the other creatures, and you are in the divine image, yet you are a created being. Important. How did David create us? As by Michael, was in them is told the Kim von Achai. David created a human being in such a way that the food, the nutrition that's going to keep you alive, you're the same as an animal in that regard. Which is a stark reminder, a humbling reminder, that humans are effectively like animals, at least in this regard. That's why this is relevant to the story of creation. Know your place. The question still remains. The pasuk sagt doch vor Torah du Geimer, but the Torah does say that we have authority over the animals. Therefore, Rashi has to say, yes, you have dominion over the animals, but you don't have permission to kill those animals in order to eat them. On Essen Basar. The Torah wants us to be clear. They gave you authority and dominion over the animals, but not in this realm. Here, the permission was withdrawn. You don't have the right to kill an animal. On the far is Hashem Medaik Lo Hirsha. That's where Rashi uses the expression Lo Hirsha, not Asur, Lo Hirsha. That degree of dominion was not given. Und sagt nicht Nesser v'chayotze lose. Weil die Adgasha da is nicht von Isser von Achilas Basar, because here Rashi is not, or the Torah, is not emphasizing the prohibition against humans eating meat. Nor if the Pirishin al von Redu, as doesn't it kill Rishlamis Beri Berechel Basar, rather it is a definition of a key component of what it is to be a human, to have dominion over the animals. That dominion does not extend to killing an animal in order to eat it. Val Pizeh, with that information, is like moving time Rashi as the Isur from Basar is not Lahamis Beri Berechel Basar. That explains why Rashi is very specific. You're only not allowed to kill an animal in order to eat its meat. There is no fundamental Isur in the meat. The Isur is the human taking advantage of the animal. Bald, as the estate from this is Shishler sein von der Modem and Gela Michael die Sach von Rudu if Chule, because as Rashi has illustrated, the Torah wants us over here to understand that Rudu does not give you the right to kill an animal in order to eat it. Is move on as das was sich dach verfall von Lahamis Bervelechel Basar. Well, where is that going to be relevant? It's going to be relevant if you think you're going to kill an animal. We have to tell you don't kill the animal in order to eat its meat. Was has even von Achilas Basar? Why is that there is Moshe v'sholet if the Chayis Chule? Because if a human kills an animal, that implies that the human has authority and dominion over the animal, which is exactly what the Torah is restricting over here. So much authority, so much power, so much rights to be able to kill an animal in order to eat it. But let's say the animal died of natural causes. There's no reason at this point in history to forbid you from eating that meat. Which now it helps us understand why Rashi gets into so much detail when he tells us in the time of Noach we are permitted to eat meat. When Rashi tells us that at the time of Bnei Noach it was now permitted to eat meat, immediately you have a question. Why? Fundamentally, how can a human being eat meat? We've already illustrated the whole purpose of not killing an animal is to keep the human in check. Because we want the human not to run away with his own ego and to recognize that he's just a created being. So what? After the Mabel, humans don't need that reminder anymore not to become full of themselves. Therefore, Rashi says, let me give you context. It's not that we completely undo the need to keep humans humble. Look at the pasuk and you'll understand. Because what does the pasuk say? On the Baye, Rashi is aliphatic. This sima pasuk here, a case of Gomer. Firstly, the pasuk tells us, and Rashi points us out, that meat will now become like the vegetation. And Beis is most of the portion l'shena pasuk kerek esav sheet tarti le'odam arishan, to which Rashi adds, just like vegetation is something I, Hashem, permitted to Adam arishan, I'm now permitting meat to you. Why is that all relevant? Midem Daiton Rashi is illustrating as das was mathematic event Basar Bnei Noach, the fact that we permitted Bnei Noach to eat meat is nicht weil bazei is nicht negert by Grenzen von Redu ben Gela Michael. It's not because they are now a different type of human being who does not have to be kept in check with regards to how they treat animals. Now says a heter. There's a special heter given to them. Mitzat demselben time and for the same reason. Gleich zu dem time was der Eibishter hat Mathe gemacht Jerek Esev. In the same way as the Eibishter gave permission to be able to eat vegetation, as Rashi says, that are permitted Odom Rishon. Why did Hashem allow us to eat vegetation? To be able to survive, to be able to be healthy. Why does Hashem subsequently allow us to eat meat? Because we need the protein, we need the nutrition in order to survive. On the far last Rashi, that's why Rashi doesn't quote the part of the pasuk that says you are now permitted to eat it. Because it's not that he's permitting us to eat meat over here. Not that time what's relevant is why he's permitting us to eat meat over here. That this is now what is needed in order for human beings to be able to survive, and therefore the Eibishter permits it. Now this attitude which the Torah is creating leaves us with a tremendous message. The lesson is, as the Adam darf zusammen mit Rudu wissen, arge what's the message? That together with the fact that Adam has authority and dominion over the animals, he has to remember his place. To recognize that he's no more than a created being, he's not some kind of a demigod. It's not zu verworren von Geiven in Jonah Bild zu was kann rauskommen von nicht richtig verstehendem Rudu. Not only is that because we don't want the person to get a big head and misunderstand and abuse their position as the one with dominion over the animals. Now, as in them hanged up the Rudu, but it's actually more profound than that. In order to have dominion over the animals, that can only happen if you know your place. An arrogant human has no dominion over animals. Pshas Mensch tracht, as the Rudu meint as is the Reude. If a human being thinks, hey, I'm a big deal, I'm a human being, therefore I have authority over the animals. Because of my own abilities. That person cannot actually have control over the animals. Because he's a being like any other being. No one being has a greatness of the other. It's only when a person is conscious of the truth, which is that I'm a created being like all other creatures. And therefore, and the fact that I should have any power or dominion over the animals is because the Eibishter entitled and empowered me. Then I can have power with the animals because it's not mine, it's the Eibishter's empowerment. It's not me who's some kind of a special being. It's the Eibishter who's empowering me. It's the emissary from the Eibush, and therefore it's not me controlling the animals. It's the Eibush controlling the animals, using me as his representative. The one who created me is the one who gave me this power and ability to do so. As Rashi says, when he looks at those words, Urudu, that you'll have dominion over the animals, immediately Rashi points out, that word Urudu obviously implies dominion, and equally L'shon Yerida also implies descent. Why? Because if a person deserves, then they can have dominion over the animals. And if they, God forbid, do not deserve, then they have no dominion. In fact, to the contrary, the animals will have control over them. Which has a far deeper message as well. What does it mean? Zocha, as we well know, is for Lashon Zikuch. The word Zocha doesn't just mean to merit, it means to be refined. Eis geedelt, where persons become, so to speak, where the persons become refined. When a person refines themselves, which means that the person rids themselves of arrogance and even of a sense of self. Not a gate but the person lives their life just doing what the Eibishter wants. Then is ready by him. That kind of a person can have authority and dominion over the animals. But if a person hasn't refined themselves, or at least not refine themselves sufficiently. Which means the person is very self-conscious, not self-conscious, but conscious of self. Which means I'm a human, I'm a developed creature, and therefore I have authority over the animals. That kind of person is going to actually be degraded. That kind of person not only will say that person is like any other created being, but they're actually demoted to be lower than other created beings. That's why it's straight after the Eibusha telling us that we have dominion over the animals. That's where the Eibusha shows that we're the same as animals with regards to diet. That we should understand the nature of a Rudu. That we do not inherently have the power, the rights over animals. It's only if we're dedicated to the Eibusha. Without a sense of self, then we can have some kind of dominion. The which has a lesson for us. So we know that Adam, which is the word used generically for humans, is also specifically used to refer to the Jewish people. And the Eibush is telling us, as Jewish people, we should have dominion over the world, to the extent that nations should send their representatives in order to help us, look after our flocks, etc. That we should have dominion to the extent that when it comes to work, others are willing to assist us. Even in the time of Golus, where the nations of the world have dominion, they are the powerful ones, they're the governments, they're the kings, etc. The prophecy is specifically that they will retain their prestige and they will be there assisting us. Is in them the which has a tremendous lesson for us. As long as a person thinks, I have abilities and therefore I will succeed. Even if the person says, well, the reason I have abilities is because the Eibishter says I'm like the Eibishter. I'm God-like. I'm B'Tselem Elokim. I have many great talents or many great characteristics. My achievements, my greatness. In that case, the person is not refined and the person cannot have dominion over the animals. To the contrary. Nicht nur was tun, was beziehen sich nicht zu ihm mit Kavod v'chulei, which means practically not only will the nations of the world not treat that person with respect, if einer was is the Rede v'shalut, as they would treat somebody who they see as an authority with respect, not verkehrt, but to the contrary. In fact, to the contrary, not only will the person not have the upper hand over the rest of the nations, but the person will feel that they have to kowtow to the rest of the nations. And they have to adopt all kinds of goyish perspectives. When a person refines themselves, and the person acknowledges that all my abilities, all of my strength comes only from the Eibishter. That person's not going to live their life by their own dictates of their own understanding, etc. But rather they're going to follow the guidance and wisdom of the Torah, which is the Eibishter Shulchan Aruch. Person behaves in alignment with the instructions of the Eibishter, and therefore he's able to go through life with the power of the one sending him through life, which is the Eibishter himself. That person will always have the upper hand. We'll see the nations of the world stepping in to assist because they'll respect him. And then that will happen even in the time of Golus, and that will lead us to have the ultimate state of the world coming to assist us in our avodah, which will happen with Mashiach, which Hashem should happen immediately.